Hi there, I'm Vicki Parfenow from Aussie Stampers and Vicki Parfenow Studio. Today I'm going to be working with some Distress Oxide ink and creating some backgrounds for two of my art journals. This first journal has beautiful thick paper and it's a watercolour paper. So I'm bringing in some carved pumpkin, squeezed lemonade and cracked pistachio, rubbing them onto my media mat. This is a media mat from Waffle Crafts. I find it's really good for working with. Spray some water, wait till you get those little droplets showing, and just dab edges and sides. Don't overdo this step. That is the common mistake I see a lot of people make when they overdo the first step. I'm just blotting some of the excess with a towel. And I'm bringing in my next journal because I want to use this ink while it's still there in front of me. And this time I'm going to cut out 2 pages. I like using ring binder journals because this little simple trick of being able to cut through each of the rings means you can take the pages out, work on them, and then put them back in again. I've got 2 pages here because I'm going to work on the title page, and I'm also going to work on the second page and create a double page spread. So on one of these pieces I'm working on both sides. You can see this one I'm working both sides. The other one I'm just working on the front. Spraying a little bit more water. I'm only dipping into the edges here because otherwise it's going to be too brown for me. So I'm just picking up some of those little extra pieces. And now that's the first stage done. I'm going to let all of those pages dry, all 3 of them. Just clean up with a baby wipe, and I'm bringing in some different colours. I'm bringing some of that cracked pistachio back. I'd like to see a little bit more of that in the second layer. I also have peacock feathers and barn door. So these are Distress Oxide inks by Ranger. Again, I'm going to activate the inks. You want to wait, give it a second to see those bubbles rising. And then these pages are now dry. I've dried them using a heat tool. And I'm just going to dip in where I think I'd like to have a little bit more colour. So that's the first layer of those. Just dipping in just where I think. Again, don't overdo it because you want the layers to shine through. You don't want to cover them up too much. And just on one side of that larger journal page because I'm making a single page with that. And now I'm just dipping in on the spine where the rings will go. So I'm just tapping into it so that I don't have a white edge right at the end of my page where it attaches. Now this is a little trick I like to do sometimes. I'm just dotting on some of the peacock feathers because I want to have a little bit of a spotty effect on it. Drying that off, taking it to the heat tool, and then coming in again. And then it looks a bit spotty now, but when you actually lay some of that peacock feathers on top, like that, you can see it integrates it into the background. And that just gives a little bit of a different effect. Back in with the baby wipe, cleaning down that waffle mat. This is by Waffle Crafts. It's a media mat. I love it. I use it for a lot of my watercolour paintings, especially when I'm working with watercolour inks. I can put them in those little wells aside. It's all one piece. It's made of silicone. It's great. Now I'm putting this into a stamp positioner. It's not 100% dry. I'm just dabbing down with a little bit of a baby wipe to get a little bit more spotting on it, which is good. And I am using this stamp. This is an art stamp by, I think it's Carabel Studios. Yes, it is. And it's called Visage Helena. I am using Tuxedo Memento black ink. And I'm inking up the stamp and bringing the door closed. And I'm going to do this over and over simply because this is paper from a field watercolour journal by Handbook. And the paper in this is beautiful, thick watercolour paper. It's 140 pound or 300 GSM and it's acid-free cold pressed watercolour paper. Absolutely beautiful. It doesn't buckle when you work with it. It's really gorgeous. So I'm just doing this over and over again. The paper's not 100% dry. If it was completely dry, I wouldn't have had to do this step so many times. So I can just see a few little spots there that haven't quite come out with the eyes, and it's a detailed stamp, so I want to be able to make sure I can read all the details. And we've got it. Okay, so that's okay. I'm going to set that aside, clean off my stamp, and now I'm bringing in these 2 pages that I did earlier, just flicking them over to see which would work best as a double page spread and which would work as the title page. So this is the journal that I have here. It is a Strathmore visual journal. It's Bristol smooth cardstock, and it's beautiful paper in this. It has 56 pages, and it's 3.5 inches by 5 inches, or 8.9 centimetres by 12.7 centimetres. You can see I've put some washi tape on the cover in gold and black washi tape just to jazz it up a little and make it my own. Now I'm going to remove that mat because I've finished with all the colouring. Now it's just stamping. So I'll need to put this little piece of foam into my stamp position. And this stamp, is a photopolymer stamp, which is quite thin. The first stamp I used was a rubber stamp, so it's thicker. So you need this little mat underneath you to bump up your stamp so that it gives a better contact with the page. I'm going to dry that off a little bit. It's still just a tad wet, and I really do want this to be dry. That's better. Okay, positioning those magnets on top. I have my stamp lined up, looks good. So I'm going to bring in that same Tuxedo Memento black ink, which is a lovely fine ink and stamps beautifully. Start each day with a grateful heart. Now this stamp is an Australian stamp. It's by artstamps.com.au. and it's Art Stamps Australia. It doesn't actually have a name, it's just, you look up that, I guess you would put those words in, it'll come up. Start each day with a grateful heart. I brought in a gel pen because that S was stamped over a very dark colour and it wasn't showing for me, but that's fixed that problem quite nicely. So this is how easy it is to pop it back into your book. You just squeeze those wires together, and the paper's not at all damaged. You can take that out and put it back as many times as you want, as long as you're careful. And you can see how this double page spread is now going to work as well. And this is ready for another project. I won't be doing a project on this today, but I have my background papers ready. So I've been able to make 4 backgrounds in one setting. Okay, very happy with how that turned out. That's a really nice page, and look at the colours and layers in that. You can see those spots coming through, which is what I wanted. Okay, now moving on to the larger field journal, which is 8 by 8 inches this page. I'm going to bring in a multi-liner, a very fine multi-liner, and I'm just going to reference the picture on the stamp to make sure I can add any lines, any tiny little areas that were missed. And you don't really need to do this step, but I was a stickler for getting it right, so I decided I'd just add these tiny little bits. There's only a very few spots where I need to add a line or two. Now that looks pretty good. She does look as though she's got a lightning strike up the middle of her forehead, so I'm going to soften that back right at the very end. I'm bringing in a white gel pen just to brighten up her eyes, the whites of her eyes. And while I'm there, I think I might just put a few little highlights, one on the tip of her nose and a couple on her lips, on the bottom lip in particular. And that just brings some of that white from the background back in. And I'm going to pop her back into the journal. So I am going to soften that stripe up the middle of her forehead, but I can't do it until she is absolutely dry. Otherwise, it will really not work at all. So I have some craft glue here, and I'm just going to put one of these little chipboard pieces on, which will be my sentiment or the words that I'm using, Choose to Shine. And they are from Ranger, those chipboards. So that's looking pretty good. And I'm going to make sure she dries overnight before I attempt to do any ink blending on her forehead there. All right, so this is how they started out and ended up. So a couple of really interesting ways to do some backgrounds here, and you'll see in the final photo that I've softened back that stripe quite considerably. I hope you enjoyed that process today. I really enjoyed getting my backgrounds done and sharing that with you. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll look forward to seeing you again in the studio next time. My Instagram account is Vicki Parfenow Studio if you'd like to follow me there as well. Have a great day. Bye for now.